At the very least, a UAP or a group of UAPs are essentially trying to behave like an adversary. They're boxing in a fighter jet.
Di recente abbiamo partecipato all'evento CUFOM di Torino, che si è dimostrato ben organizzato e strutturato, in un'ottima location, tenuto in Italia e non a San Marino. Possiamo quindi presumere che gli organizzatori adempiranno ai loro obblighi fiscali. Un plauso a loro per questo. Abbiamo inviato 3 domande via WhatsApp, a cui non abbiamo ricevuto risposta. D'altra parte l'evento CUFOM si concentrava su argomenti come il caso Tic Tac, reso pubblico nel 2017, o l'UFO di Magenta, che noi avevamo già trattato sul canale all'inizio del 2023. Abbiamo compreso dai contenuti che era rivolto comprensibilmente ai neofiti. Durante l'evento abbiamo assistito a un intervento molto interessante di Massimo Tampieri sulla Luna, arricchito da fotografie inedite. Inoltre Marco Columbro ha tenuto 2 brevi ma stimolanti interventi. Il tutto è stato coordinato in modo impeccabile da 2 presentatori professionali e preparati. Tuttavia il resto del programma è stato meno soddisfacente, con alcuni errori di rilievo. Un esempio di tali errori è stato il riferimento al programma Kona Blue, che in realtà non è mai esistito. Alcuni dei protagonisti dell'attuale disclosure avrebbero davvero voluto avviarlo, ma il progetto è stato bloccato in fase iniziale da chi era coinvolto nel famoso programma, che viene spesso indicato come programma legacy, cioè che esiste e prosegue da decenni, risalendo almeno alla fine degli anni 40. Recentemente è emerso il nome, Immacolate Constellation. Questo nome potrebbe sembrare un gioco di parole. Voi cosa ne pensate? Scrivetelo nei commenti. L'argomento UFO è complesso, stigmatizzato e difficile da trattare. In questo campo è essenziale essere precisi e basarsi su testimonianze il più possibile autorevoli, evitando conclusioni non supportate da prove concrete. Il caso Kona Blue ne è un esempio significativo. Non solo il programma non è mai stato avviato, ma è stato utilizzato dall'ARO come argomento per respingere l'idea che esistano UFO extraterrestri o alieni. Coloro che avrebbero voluto portare avanti Kona Blue non possono confermare l'esistenza di attività extraterrestri proprio perché il progetto non ha mai avuto luogo. Questo è il significato che dà l'ARO all'aver pubblicato i documenti su Kona Blue. Riteniamo che Kona Blue fosse stato concepito davvero per uno studio approfondito sugli UFO. Noi siamo convinti che questi fenomeni siano reali e che non siano né alieni né extraterrestri, ma provenienti da altre dimensioni nello spazio-tempo. Su questo punto l'ARO specula in un modo discutibile. Noi, in Intermundia, anche se crediamo fermamente nell'esistenza degli UFO e delle NHI, le intelligenze non umane, un termine che la ARO evita di utilizzare e che è stato introdotto dai sostenitori della disclosure anche per abbracciare una vasta gamma di significati, noi riteniamo che sia errato affermare che Kona Blue è stato un programma operativo, perché non è mai stato realizzato. Oggi però conosciamo finalmente il vero nome del programma, Immacolata Constellation.
How about this? A brand new bombshell whistleblower report alleges the existence of a secret Pentagon UAP and UFO program, and it's called Immaculate Constellation. The report, turned over to Congress, claims the government has high-resolution pictures of UAPs. In the latest episode of News Nation's Reality Check, Ross Coulthart sat down with Michael Schellenberger, the independent journalist who spoke to that whistleblower.
Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. Now, this week, we have a very interesting guest with some very interesting new information about what's really been going on behind the scenes in Congress on the issue of UAPs. I have 2 words to say to you, viewers: Immaculate Constellation. So, Michael Schellenberger is a professor, author and journalist who's been very outspoken on issues such as free speech, censorship, homelessness and the environment. Most recently, he's been warning of the dangers of the encroaching threat of censorship by governments, media companies and NGOs. But it was Michael's sources on the subject of UAPs, UFOs that first caught our attention in September last year, when he published a story revealing 30 whistleblowers working for the federal government or government contractors had come forward to give evidence or protected disclosures to the Office of the Intelligence Community Inspector General or the DoD's Inspector General, the Defence Inspector General, or to Congress. And in that article, he disclosed how testimony included both first and second-hand accounts of crash retrievals of UAP craft, reverse engineering programs by the US, the Russians, and the Chinese government, and the testing of materials obtained from retrieved craft, active and ongoing government disinformation operations, kinetic military action with UAPs, contact and collaboration with non-human intelligences, and the successful reverse engineering of a triangle-shaped craft with unconventional propulsion. Now, it was Michael who had interviews with some of those anonymous whistleblowers back in September 23, and his story was full of truth bombs. How Stephanie O'Sullivan, for example, a former Associate Deputy Director of the CIA and Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, is aware of a UAP crash retrieval program and reverse engineering program. And Michael's sources said she'd denied its existence to Senator Marco Rubio in a private meeting. Well, he's back. Michael, welcome to Reality Check, and I'm honoured to have you on, sir. Let's talk about this great article you've got this week, which is Pentagon is illegally hiding secret UFO programs from Congress, sources allege. Your understanding from your source is that Immaculate Constellation is the code name for this unacknowledged Special Access Program, the USAP. Now, let's get into the nerdy talk about what security classifications mean. There's special access programs, which are secrets that are protected, top secret SCI clearance secrets. Then you've got unacknowledged special access programs. And then you have another category of waived unacknowledged special access programs, WUSAPs. And in the case of WUSAPs, there is, I understand, a very clear exemption for good reasons, for national security reasons, to protect highly classified programs. These WUSAPs are only briefed, I think, orally to members of the Gang of Eight. But the unacknowledged special access programs, USAPs, which is what you say Immaculate Constellation is, there is no reason at all why that could not be disclosed inside a SCIF to the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, the Armed Services Committee, all of those oversight committees that are part of the constitutional requirements for accountability and transparency. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. There was no mention by the new whistleblower or the people that confirmed the existence of Immaculate Constellation that it was a WUSAP. It was simply an unacknowledged special access program. And so it should have been absolutely briefed to the Gang of Eight. I will say that one of the individuals who confirmed the existence of the special access program told me that simply publishing the name unacknowledged, the name Immaculate Constellation would trigger surveillance of me, that it is located, is kept under very tight secrecy in the office of the Secretary of Defense. Obviously, that is a little nerve-wracking. I will say I gave the Pentagon, I emailed the Pentagon with a very detailed description of my article. Last Friday, they asked, in the morning, they asked for more time. I gave them until Monday. Monday, they said they needed until the end of the day Monday. I had not heard from them by the end of the day Monday. So they had almost 5 days to get back to me. And you and I are recording this on Monday evening. So if there is an update to this, hopefully you'll mention that to the viewers. But I have not heard from the Pentagon, which you can interpret however you like. But I think the bottom line is still the same here. If you believe in democracy, which is ruled by the people rather than ruled by secret police, intelligence, and security forces, this is information that absolutely needs to be briefed by the DoD and or the IC to that Gang of Eight or to a broader committee of Congress.
Now, Michael, I can tell you there's a lot in your article that doesn't come as a surprise to me. I just haven't been able to corroborate with my sources what you've been able to find out about certain code names and what you know about the contents of that program. But what I can tell you is the reference made by your source to the fact that there is a database that's being kept separate, which was discovered. I am told that what the Admiral Tom Wilson memo written by Dr. Eric Davis says is correct, that inside the office of the Undersecretary for Defence Intelligence, there was, and I'm told still is, a completely separate database that you would understand and your source would understand goes by the name Immaculate Constellation. And it's interesting to hear from you so many years later that what Admiral Thomas Wilson stumbled across, and I have to add consistently now denies, is now being proven to be the case, that there was a completely separate database that was locked off from the rest of the Defense Department computer system, which would explain, by the way, why Edward Snowden, when he did his sleuthing, couldn't find anything about it. There is a completely separate database which is kept completely airlocked from the rest of the Defense Department that contains all of this information relating to the UAP program. So let's go through this. I'm really interested to know more. Your understanding is that Immaculate Constellation consists of the capability to detect, quarantine, and transfer UAP and alien reproduction vehicle collection incidents before they are observed and circulated within the military intelligence enterprise, thus serving as a means of enforcing internal information security. Now, I presume UAP is a reference to a non-human craft, correct?
Well, I don't know, honestly, and I mean, I laugh a little bit because you always have a lot of information when you're writing an article and you're trying to figure out what to keep in and keep out, and I did keep that information in there because that was the information that the whistleblower has in their report. Alien reproduction vehicle. I don't think I'm not sure I'd used that term before. It's obviously going to raise a lot of eyebrows, and I should stress that I'm not saying I know that they exist or that I'm endorsing any other part of the things that have been said about that. But indeed, that is what this person has put in their report to members of Congress, notifying them about this database, which also, Ross, I wanted to mention because earlier I mentioned that there's a significant amount of visual data. However, the whistleblower in their report says that they also includes human intelligence. And so you're also looking at reports. There's one spectacular incident described in the report. I mean, there's several in the report. One of them is of an F-22 being surrounded by UAPs shaped like orbs and effectively escorted. Escorted makes it sound like nice, but sort of forcibly moved out of its mission area by these UAPs. So a real direct engagement by UAPs. I don't know, and the whistleblower is not saying what those UAPs are. The person's not saying that they're, non-human or extraterrestrial. Obviously, if they're Chinese or Russian or Iranian or something, that's a technology that is not out there and should be very alarming for straight defense reasons. But yeah, then the introduction of this term alien reproduction vehicle is effectively a reference to craft that are using not using typical propulsion and using something that is more akin to what people call anti-gravity.
So that's the interesting thing. There's two nomenclatures that we need to define in what your whistleblower has told you goes into his report. There's UAP, and that's grey. We just don't know at this moment. But alien reproduction vehicle, I can tell you, is very, very clearly a reference to a vehicle that has been constructed from non-human technology that is being operated presumably by either private aerospace or the United States government.
Yeah, that's right. And it's an interesting, the language is very important because if you read what Arrow wrote, there is potentially room within that report for them to be able to, uh, they say we haven't found any evidence of vehicles from extraterrestrials or from other planets, but they do seem to leave open the door potentially to this different category of craft. And so that is one potential, is that, I mean, for me, as a fairly newcomer to this issue, I was not familiar at all with this discourse, but basically there is this idea, and it is in the whistleblower report, that the United States government is in possession of craft that it has itself made based on UAPs that it has captured, and apparently using anti-gravity as the means for propulsion.
Now, you mentioned, Michael, that there's a significant volume of intelligence reports in this database that the whistleblower describes, documenting first-hand encounter with UAPs or UFOs by defence personnel, and that this exists within databases accessible to the intelligence community. There's high-quality imagery, IMINT, and measurement and signature intelligence, MASINT, of UAPs. And the sources of this intelligence are a blend of directed and incidental collection capabilities positioned in low Earth orbit, the upper atmosphere, as well as military and civilian aviation altitudes and maritime environments. I've got to ask, Michael, did your source show you any of this imagery?
No, I did not see any of them. I would have loved to, but I think it's fair to say this person felt that that would be just a severe risk. I mean, that's the kind of thing that this person felt could, and they could end up in prison essentially if they had attempted to capture any of that imagery. I did also, though, want to say, Ross, because I didn't mention it earlier and we haven't talked about it, it's important to point out that, and you just sort of said it, these are images and other data collected by sensors that are operated by the U.S. military and by the intelligence community and potentially others. But this is not just photos and videos shot by civilians or even commercial airline pilots with their cell phones or even sophisticated cameras. This is shot by U.S. government. Much of this material is captured by U.S. government personnel. And so the language that they use in the report is that there's a clear chain of custody on this evidence. And so, in other words, for people that pay attention to the popular discussion of UAPs, there's a lot of videos out there, and often we don't know who shot them or where they came from, or it's not a clear chain of custody. That's the gold standard as any investigators. You want to know exactly who shot it, who's had custody of it. That's the whole chain of custody, so that if anybody wants to do further investigations, you can go interview the crew. So, of course, one of the most famous examples is the famous Tic Tac sighting, where you have 4 Navy pilots who are all incredibly credible Navy pilots who tell the exact same story about what happened when they encountered this UAP. And so that's the level of quality that you're talking about, and a lot of it, not a little bit of it. And we've heard in the past, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Christopher Mellon has said that there is a significant body of that information. We've also heard Lou Elizondo and David Grush say that. But this is the first time, to my knowledge, that anybody has actually named this unacknowledged special access program and described in some detail both the kinds of evidence gathered as well as the shapes of the UAPs. And I should just say that this report, I hope at some point it does become public. It's a fascinating, there's much more in it than I could summarize in the article, but there's just a fascinating description of different UAPs that we've all heard about, orbs and tic tac and discs and triangles and boomerangs and all the different, you think about the Phoenix lights. And so you sort of, if you have some familiarity with the big UAP cases, it's very striking to see that there is a database of UAPs captured apparently by the Defense Department and the intelligence community in a database that Congress, at a minimum, the Gang of Eight should have access to.
So let's go through the detail that you were given. I'm intrigued to hear that you heard a lot more detail than you were able to put into your article. But as I understand it, the report that has been given to Congress by the whistleblower describes in detail various UAPs and how from 1991 to 2022, the most common UAP shapes reported in this data set were spheres, orbs, disks, saucers, ovals, tic-tacs, triangles, boomerang arrowheads, and irregular organic shapes. Your source obviously had an opportunity to look at that database. Can you give me some information on the size of the whistleblower report? How many pages is it? How much detail is being provided to Congress?
Yeah, the report. So I have the report. It's, I think it's 25 pages. It's very well written. This is a professional, somebody whose job it is to interpret information and evidence, somebody who obviously feels moral duty to the Constitution. Similarly to David Grush, this is a person who obviously loves their country and is patriotic, and does not feel that this information, if it got out, would undermine national security. I hope very much that the report, that some version of it can be made public, because this is taxpayers paid for this research, as you mentioned, over many decades. I am not sure that people, maybe people really know what it is. Maybe they don't, but either way, there's no, I don't see any reason. I didn't see anything in it. And I'm not a journalist and with all due respect to Julian Assange, I would not just release information willy-nilly. I also care about the security of the United States, as does this person. That's why I gave the Defense Department almost 5 days to get back to me. But it has an incredible amount of information, and I think there's just been a lot of gaslighting on this issue. And one of the things I describe in here, and your viewers probably know this history better than I do, but basically the CIA created something called the Robertson Panel in 1953, which came out and said that all of these reports should be not only aggressively debunked, reports of UAPs, but ridiculed. And ridicule is a very severe form of disinformation, because it really attacks the character of a person. It's a way of calling people mentally ill. I think it's very cruel. And so I think that this report, validates that people were not crazy that reported these things, that these things are real physical manifestations, objects, phenomena, that these incidents are real, that they've been viewed by many enlisted soldiers, that a campaign of repression and threats and fear has been waged against people. And then the gaslighting, which is also, it's a tactic of abusers, continued from the Robertson Panel in 1953, and then of course your viewers probably also know there's something called the Condon Committee in 1960. I think it ran from 66 to 68, which also dismissed all of this. And so I'm also somebody that is very concerned about government disinformation. And there are multiple cases of acknowledged and proven disinformation, including by the Air Force Office of Special Intelligence. And so we don't want the government, you don't want the government hiding things that are in the public's interest to know. And you also don't want the government spreading disinformation and ruining people's lives, because these are real people's lives we're talking about here. And there's so far, no justification has been given for this level of secrecy, censorship, and disinformation.
let's get into the nitty-gritty, some of the detail that you do reveal in your report. And there is, as you've already acknowledged a little bit earlier, an absolutely incredible incident involving an F-22 Raptor, which is the top frontline fighter jet in the United States military arsenal. And it describes orbs surrounding and forcing an F-22 out of a patrol area. The F-22 broke trajectory and attempted to evade, but was intercepted and boxed in by approximately 3 to 6 UAPs. Now, the thing about that, Michael, is I often cop it from some viewers who are very much of the rosy view about non-human intelligence, that they're all benevolent and kind. What you seem to be describing here is something where, at the very least, a UAP or a group of UAPs are essentially trying to behave like an adversary. They're boxing in a fighter jet. What's going on? What does the whistleblower think about that finding? And what conclusion did you reach on the basis of the evidence that you read in the report?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, I mean, so again, I want to stress, I'm new to this. I have, beginner mind on this issue. I mean, I'm not by any means an expert on it or a military expert. So with those caveats out of the way, I mean, the first most obvious thing you're struck by with that particular case is that this technology or form of life or whatever it is, adversary, is demonstrating dominance. I mean, just the most simple basic thing is that there's somebody if there's an interaction, it can be cooperative or among equals, or it can be hierarchical, and there's dominance by a greater power. And in this case, that those craft or phenomena or whatever are demonstrating dominance. And that does have to do with that TikTok incident that the Navy pilots describe. I mean, I think you could argue that it wasn't not necessarily, we don't know if it's, say, hostile. In other words, nobody was shot down and there's no evidence that anybody was harmed. But dominance is about power and about a demonstration of capabilities. And so clearly, in that case, and there are other cases in that report, which again I hope is made public. These are phenomena showing dominance. It's not showing, benevolent space brotherhood. It's demonstrating dominance at a very basic physical level. You don't need to do a lot of interpretation to see that that's what's going on.
So in the report, you actually describe how one UAP maneuvered very close to the jet, to the starboard of the cockpit, and it established a rigid spatial relationship with the F-22, so that when the jet was rolling and diving and trying to get away from this object, it stayed fixed. That's what I find fascinating. Whatever the technology is behind these objects, what they were able to do was track exactly what the F-22 was doing. It couldn't shake it.
Amazing. I mean, I think, anybody that knows some of the history of this, it sounds a lot like Foo Fighters, from World War II, these similar orbs. I mean, orbs are very a common UAP, but not, because I think an important piece of context is that, and I describe in my article, I give a lot of space and explain the conventional explanations of this. How might a UAP debunker, how would they describe this? One of the ideas is that this is sort of a natural phenomenon. This is maybe a new plasma or a kind of ball lightning. Doesn't seem to be that. It would be an extraordinary, because it's moving clearly with the jet. And so
does it acknowledge that the jet, I mean, a lot of these pilots in the F-22 have got phased array radar systems, which are incredibly top-of-the-line radar. Is there any acknowledgement, to your knowledge, in the report as to whether any of these objects were picked up on radar?
That's a good question. On that specific case, I'm not sure, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because yes, there is a significant discussion of tracking these objects on radar. And so radar is a big part of the evidence base. The report also mentions that that they are documenting both the UAPs and the effects of UAPs through sensors tracking their physical effects on the Earth environment that are maybe not visible, or they say are not visible. So what's being emphasized? I'm sorry, go ahead.
What does that mean? What do you mean their physical effects on the Earth environment?
I can't remember if there was anything more specific about it, but it was, I think the language was atmospheric effects of these UAP. And I don't remember any more detail than that.
One of the things you do mention, there's another incident that you talk about where an orange orb was watched by the crew of a Navy aircraft carrier. A sphere descended from high altitude to about 100 to 200 yards directly above the flight deck of this aircraft carrier. It emitted a soft orange-red light, which didn't illuminate the ocean or the flight deck, despite the appearance of intense luminosity. The surface of the UAP was observed to be dynamic, roiling like the surface of the sun. And it was this bit here in your article that intrigued me. It appears to be acknowledging biological effects on humans, the consciousness, psychical engagement by these objects with human observers. It said afterwards, observing personnel felt as if they snapped out of a trance and a sense of personal unease. That's a really interesting biological effect of this phenomena, isn't it?
Yeah, and very impressive that it's acknowledged by the military. I mean, I think, as you know, this phenomenon has a physical nuts and bolts hardware part of it, which is the level at which I think which many people are uncomfortable even talking about, but certainly it's probably less uncomfortable than some of the psychological, or you might even say spiritual, effects that people describe relating to the phenomenon. So I was impressed to see that had been properly documented by whoever it was in the U.S. military that had done the interviews with the crew to describe these hypnotic effects, because it's clearly been part of the history of the research of UAPs and their effects on people, is that people describe having lingering effects, both bad and good. Certainly a sense of awe, which may just be awe at some more powerful technology than we have, but also something that's sort of uncanny and doesn't lend itself as easily to language, that these soldiers on a aircraft carrier were apparently describing to some investigator.
Anche Daniel Sheehan, l'avvocato dei whistleblower, scrive che almeno altri 2 dei suoi clienti hanno confermato l'esistenza del programma Immacolata Constellazione. E forse non ne eravate a conoscenza, ma il 13 novembre inizieranno le udienze pubbliche, pochi giorni dopo le elezioni americane, il che tra l'altro sottolinea l'urgenza della questione. Daniel Sheehan sostiene che se non dovessero testimoniare, il Congresso sostanzialmente viene meno al suo dovere costituzionale. Parole forti. Ora andrete su Google a cercare il termine Immaculate Constellation per vedere quali informazioni sono disponibili? Ottimo! Ma è interessante notare che questo termine non era mai stato cercato prima di giugno del 2023. Qui, dalle pagine di analisi delle ricerche di Google, vediamo infatti che sono state fatte circa 30 ricerche poco prima che David Grush rilasciasse la sua intervista. Probabilmente questo è avvenuto dopo che qualche membro del Congresso, informato, ha iniziato a cercare online per vedere se fossero disponibili informazioni a riguardo. Passiamo adesso a Kona Blue.
Now.
More than a decade ago, the largest UFO investigation ever funded by the government was based here in southern Nevada. That program continued for a mere 27 months, and when it ended, there was an even more ambitious plan in the works, something code-named Kona Blue.
Documents about the Kona Blue were classified as top secret, but have finally been released by the Pentagon. 8 News Now Chief Investigator George Knapp here live in studio with more on this story.
Well, as you both know, the Department of Defense isn't exactly known for its transparency and honesty when it comes to UFO investigations. So why come clean about Kona Blue? To understand that, we have to explain what led up to Kona Blue and why Las Vegas would have been right there in the thick of it. Be forewarned, you will be exposed to dueling acronyms. Why isn't it made obvious in any of the documentation that's been made public so far?
It was completely UFO related.
Dr. Jim Lakatsky spent most of his career as an intelligence analyst and missile expert for the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. In 2007, he became interested in reports of UFO activity at certain hotspots, including a Utah property known today as Skinwalker Ranch. Lakatsky designed OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. He met with Nevada Senator Harry Reid, who helped secure $22 million in black budget funds. The contract was awarded to a subsidiary of Bigelow Aerospace. OSAP became the largest acknowledged UFO investigation in U.S. history, with 50 full-time employees, most of them based in southern Nevada. OSAP created the world's largest UFO data warehouse and produced more than 100 technical papers, though not one page from those reports has been made public by DIA. But Lakatsky and his Las Vegas colleague, Dr. Colin Kelleher, co-authored 2 books about OSAP, reporting as much as Pentagon censors would allow. In one book, Lakatsky revealed that back in 2011, he had informed a U.S. senator and a high-ranking official that, quote, the U.S. was in possession of a craft of unknown origin. The craft had no intakes, exhaust, wings, or control surfaces, no engine, fuel tanks, or fuel. In other words, the U.S. had a flying saucer. Since then, Lakatsky has declined to say more than what the Pentagon authorized.
There was more to it, considerably more to that discussion about what this situation was. We can't go into that.
But the public is now able to read much more between the lines because of the surprise release of a document declassified in February by the Department of Homeland Security. It describes a proposed UFO program codenamed Kona Blue. Not mentioned is that Kona Blue was drawn up by Lakatsky, Kelleher, and some OSAP colleagues as a successor to OSAP, and was intended to not only study but to exploit UFO technology. The papers do not mention UFOs, but there are plenty of clues. The purpose of Kona Blue was to, quote, identify potentially disruptive technologies by analyzing material of unique origin and engineering. Success would depend on gaining access to said materials. Kona Blue would establish a system to collect sightings of such technology, including at locations where there are frequent reports. There are references to advanced technology that's already been recovered. One section notes this recovered technology exists only within special access programs. Kona Blue would have created a medical division to study physical and psychological effects on humans from encounters with advanced aerial vehicles. And there's this chilling note that Kona Blue experts would, quote, handle and examine unusual and unique biological specimens. What might those be? Like OSAP, Kona Blue would have been based in Las Vegas. The document notes that buildings already cleared to handle top-secret material were standing by. But in 2009, when Nevada Senator Harry Reid wrote to the Department of Defense to ask for a special classification for the DIA program, alarm bells were set off in Washington, opposition mounted, and the program's budget was pilfered. That's why in 2011, Lakatsky, Kelleher, and others tried to find another home for what they called Kona Blue. The document showed the Department of Homeland Security was briefed about what OSAP had learned. Deputy Secretary for Science and Technology, Dr. Tara O'Toole, was impressed enough to sign off on Kona Blue. But as with OSAP, when top officials began knocking on doors to ask for access to special materials stashed in secret cubbyholes, opposition to Kona Blue quickly mobilized, and the proposed program was stopped dead. To date, Dr. Lakatsky carefully measures his words when asked about the special materials they tried to access.
There's material and there's material. Are you talking about material to be investigated? In other words, pieces falling off flying saucers? Or are you talking about full-blown craft? You know, there's a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Kona Blue was declassified by AARO, which is the current UFO program, as a way to discredit evidence and testimony provided by witnesses and whistleblowers. The former head of AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, says the people who came forward to tell about crash saucers were all referring to Kona Blue. Of course, that is preposterous. Kona Blue never existed, and only a handful of people even knew it was proposed. So what witness says they saw crash saucers as part of Kona Blue? AARO says there are no crash saucer programs, but they will not release the testimony they received. Also, as a personal note, Dr. Lukatsky and Dr. Kelleher wrote those 2 books we mentioned in that story. I was also a contributor. They sent me out for coffee, things like that.
So, George, if any reporter knows about this topic, it's you. You also have to maintain your sources. Is this one of those things you knew about but maybe couldn't say anything?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I was aware of this proposed program. We included a detailed description of it in one of those events, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, that came out in 2019. But the code name was classified, so I didn't know about that because I do not have a security clearance. So, some things they keep back even from me.
Thanks so much.
Sure.